Imagine yourself being tamed, unable to escape, and every single day being exploited and even tortured for the sake of human entertainment. We believe that this is very inhumane and that sports involving animals is something that actively supports this unethical behavior. What I'm going to do in my speech, first, I will be talking about framing, what kind of sports are we talking about, and how the model is likely to look like. Then, what is happening with animals when they're actively bred and raised uh, to be involved with sports. And then, I will be talking about a couple of alternatives that are likely to be better off for animals, but also better off for humans. So first, in terms of the framing, I think the examples that we're giving in the info slide are quite good, that we would probably ban horse racing, greyhound racing, bullfighting, rodeos, and all of that. Also, the sports that involve both humans and animals, so it's not only horse racing, but also horse riding racing that might actively be. Uh, Obviously, still to some extent, these animals are domestic animals, and or at least majority of them, and they can be kept for the further stock breeding purposes or for certain recreational purposes. So, for example, a recreational horse riding is still something that probably can exist. So probably also there's gonna be a change in the structure of business for the facilities that currently are being focused primarily on breeding and raising these animals only for sports. Note that this is already banned in the most cruel amounts of sports. So the sports that actively result in one animal dying, like having rooster fights and all of that, this is something that is already illegal, meaning that society already recognizes the suffering of the animals and certain level of need to protect them from being exploited for human entertainment. So let's start with the first argument in regards to the torture of animals. Note that in order for the animal to be able to participate in sports that involve animals, there is a need for extensive practicing. This means that these animals are often tired. They're also prone to injury because note that even when we're more tired, it's more likely for us to slip up, for us to stumble and get hurt in some sort of way. But note that these animals, when they're getting hurt, they're to some extent expenditure. Like this is something that is expected to happen to them, and therefore there is another animal that can actively step in. But actively, when talking about, for example, horses, when they break their legs, it's literally impossible for them to rehabilitate and to get back on their feet. And usually, horses, upon breaking one of its legs, are being euthanized. Also note that there is an active torture done to those animals because to achieve motivation, even in the status quo, people use pain. This means actively using the whips or certain spikes to motivate the horse to be faster, or bull to be angrier, more stressed out, and more or generally have more strength. So this is something that actively happens. And know that all of this sort of stuff is something that causes huge amounts of pain and distress to these animals. And why? Because so humans can be entertained. They can bet on it and earn a little bit of money. I don't think this is valid enough excuse to actively do this to these animals, for them to be actively bred into the horrible life full of misery, not being able to opt out in any way because they cannot escape, they cannot unalive themselves, they cannot do anything uh, but just face this kind of suffering. And know that ban is something that is very necessary because it's more easily enforced, especially both for currently illegal sports and also this kind of sports, meaning that any kind of regulation that the other side might be wanting to run essentially doesn't have fiat for it because you do not have the manpower to be able to see in every single functional democracy whether this regulation is something that checks out and something that is respected by these events. Um, In addition to all of these problematic situations in terms of the pain and stress, know that these animals are often drugged quite often to have more energy, to sleep less, to be able to train more, which is something that contributes to the exhaustion and all of these harms that they've recognized. So what is the immediate impact from the abolishment? The immediate impact is having better lives for the animals that are currently in these facilities, that currently have to face these struggles daily, and having certain relief for them, but also for the future animals that are not born yet, to essentially make sure that they're not put under this sort of circumstances and exploitation that these current animals are. In terms of the alternatives, certain level of recreational use is something that is better because it still has the involvement of humans with the animals in case they enjoy animals, but also know that the individuals that are engaging with animals no longer see them as some means to achieve certain, I don't know, reward or something like that, or certain accomplishment in sports, but rather engage with them on a more peaceful level and more respectful level, especially after the proposing this kind of abolishment arise in terms of the awareness of the welfare of these animals is something that is definitely under magnifying glass. But besides of that, there is a greater scrutiny for mistreatment, i.e. currently you cannot get an insight into every single stable or the facility that is breeding these sort of animals and training them, while on the other hand, with recreational use, you're more likely to have consumers actively coming to your premises and seeing the situation up close. So certain flagging when someone is mistreating the animals is something that is more easily done than by the consumers. So this is something that is likely to result better situation for the animals. But besides of that, it's very unnecessary to have this in sports. We have so many human sports where people can consent to, where we already have developed regulation from not exploiting people. Why should we have this additional thing in order to entertain ourselves as people? Probably we should not. Probably we should care more about the animals and protect them in this way.